What if the deepest connection you ever felt wasn't destiny pulling you towards someone, but your own unconscious mind speaking in a language you never learned how to understand? Welcome to the Jungian path, where we explore the hidden layers of the mind and uncover the psychological truths behind love, attraction, and human connection through the timeless insights of Carl Jung. Carl Jung suggested that when we feel a strong emotional pull towards someone, it may not always be about them as a person, but about what they awaken inside us. He believed the mind carries deep patterns shaped by experience, memory, and emotion, and these patterns often remain unconscious. When we meet someone who seems instantly familiar or intensely meaningful, our inner world can project unfinished feelings, desires, or wounds onto them without us realizing it. This projection makes the connection feel deeper than it actually is at the beginning. We start seeing not just the person in front of us, but also parts of ourselves reflected back through them. That is why the emotional intensity can feel like recognition or destiny. In reality, it is often our own inner psychology responding to something unresolved. Jung's point was not to dismiss these feelings, but to understand them clearly, so we don't confuse inner emotional reflection with external fate or certainty about another person. Archetypes, in Jung's view, are universal psychological patterns that exist in the collective unconscious and shape how humans perceive people, relationships, and life experiences. They are not literal images, but symbolic templates like the lover, the hero, or the caretaker that influence how we interpret emotional connections. When you meet someone and feel an immediate sense of familiarity or importance, it can be because that person is activating an archetype within your mind, not because of anything mystical happening between two souls. This is why certain people feel fated or deeply meaningful right away. Your mind is recognizing a pattern it already understands on a deeper level. The danger comes when you mistake this psychological activation for a unique, irreplaceable bond with that specific person. In reality, many different people can trigger the same archetype in you. Jung's idea helps explain why emotional attraction can feel universal, yet deeply personal at the same time, shaping expectations and emotional intensity early in connection. Projection, in Jung's sense, is when you take parts of your inner world and unconsciously place them onto another person. Instead of seeing them as they truly are, you begin to see them through the lens of your own emotions, expectations, and unresolved experiences. This often happens without awareness, especially in strong emotional or romantic connections. You might feel deeply drawn to someone, but what you are actually responding to is a reflection of something within yourself that has not been fully understood or integrated. For example, if someone carries emotional emptiness or a need for validation, they may project the idea of wholeness onto another person, believing that person completes them. In reality, that feeling comes from within. The other person becomes a screen where your inner needs are displayed, making the connection feel more intense than it objectively is. Jung emphasized that recognizing projection is important because it helps you separate emotional illusion from reality and see relationships more clearly and honestly. The shadow self, in Jung's psychology, represents the parts of your personality that you do not fully accept or are not consciously aware of. These can include emotions like insecurity, anger, vulnerability, or desires that you have pushed away because they feel uncomfortable or socially unacceptable. Even though you may not recognize these parts in yourself, they still exist and influence how you think, feel, and connect with others. When you meet someone who seems strangely attractive or emotionally intense, it is often because they reflect aspects of your shadow self back to you. You might feel drawn to their confidence, intensity, or emotional depth because those qualities exist in you in a hidden or undeveloped form. At the same time, you may also feel discomfort or emotional confusion around them because they activate what you have suppressed. Jung believed that these reactions are not random, but meaningful signals from your unconscious, showing you parts of yourself that are waiting to be acknowledged and integrated for emotional growth. The anima and animus, in Jung's theory, represent the inner feminine aspect in men and the inner masculine aspect in women. These are not about gender roles in a literal sense, but about psychological balance within every individual. The anima carries qualities like emotion, intuition, and sensitivity, while the animus carries logic, structure, and assertiveness. Everyone has both, but usually one side is more developed while the other remains unconscious. When you meet someone and feel a powerful attraction, Jung believed it can sometimes be because they are activating your anima or animus. In simple terms, you are not only reacting to who they are, but also to the hidden part of yourself that they represent. This is why the attraction can feel unusually deep or even confusing. It creates a sense of completion, as if the other person holds something you are missing. However, Jung emphasized that real balance comes not from another person, but from integrating these inner qualities within yourself over time. Synchronicity, according to Carl Jung, refers to meaningful coincidences that seem connected not by cause and effect, but by significance. It is the experience of something happening in the external world that aligns perfectly with your internal emotional state, making it feel deeply intentional even when there is no logical explanation for the timing. For example, thinking about a person and suddenly receiving a message from them can feel like more than chance, even though it may simply be coincidence. In relationships, synchronicity often strengthens emotional intensity. When events align in emotionally charged moments, the mind naturally assigns meaning to them, interpreting them as signs or destiny. Jung did not claim these events prove fate, but rather that the human mind is wired to find patterns and meaning in randomness. This tendency can make certain connections feel uniquely significant, as if the universe is guiding them. However, Jung encouraged awareness of this process so people can appreciate meaning without losing clarity about reality and emotional grounding. Emotional repetition of past wounds refers to how unresolved experiences from earlier relationships or childhood can quietly influence the way you respond to new people. Carl Jung's idea is that the unconscious mind often tries to revisit familiar emotional situations, not because it wants pain, but because it is attempting to resolve what was never fully understood or healed. This is why someone might repeatedly find themselves drawn to similar types of relationships, even when those patterns bring frustration or disappointment. When you meet someone new, the emotional response may not only come from the present moment, but also from stored experiences that are still active inside you. The mind can mistake familiarity for compatibility, even when the situation is not truly healthy or aligned. This creates a cycle where past emotions are replayed through new connections. Jung believed awareness of this pattern is essential because once you recognize it, you stop unconsciously repeating the same emotional story and begin making clearer, more conscious choices in relationships. Intensity in relationships often feels like a sign of something special or destined, but Carl Jung's perspective suggests it can also be misleading. When emotions rise quickly and feel overwhelming, the mind may interpret that surge as deep compatibility or a powerful connection. In reality, intensity is often linked to unresolved emotions, unmet needs, or unconscious projections rather than true understanding between two people. A connection can feel electric because it activates internal psychological material, not necessarily because it is stable or healthy. The nervous system reacts strongly to uncertainty, familiarity, or emotional gaps, and this reaction can be mistaken for love or fate. Jung would caution that what feels like urgency or obsession is not always depth. Sometimes it is emotional imbalance seeking resolution through another person. Recognizing this difference helps you slow down and observe whether the connection is built on real mutual understanding or simply emotional activation that fades once the unconscious need is no longer triggered. Emotional attachment and soul recognition can feel similar, but Carl Jung's perspective helps separate them. Emotional attachment is formed through psychological needs, experiences, and familiarity. It often develops when someone consistently meets your emotional expectations or triggers familiar feelings, even if those feelings are rooted in past wounds or dependency patterns. This type of connection can feel strong, but it is shaped by the mind's need for comfort, validation, or resolution. Soul recognition, as people often describe it, is usually the feeling of instant, deep familiarity or meaning when meeting someone. Jung would interpret this not as proof of destiny, but as the activation of unconscious patterns, projections, or archetypes within you. The intensity makes it feel spiritual or fated, but it is still rooted in psychology. The key difference is that emotional attachment grows through interaction over time, while recognition often appears instantly. Jung encourages awareness so you can see whether the connection is based on real mutual understanding or internal projection. Carl Jung believed the mind constantly tries to create meaning from emotional experiences, especially when something feels intense or confusing. When you go through a strong emotional connection, your psyche does not simply record the event, it interprets it. It builds a story around what happened, filling in gaps with assumptions, emotions, and personal beliefs. This is a natural defense mechanism because the mind prefers meaning over uncertainty, even if that meaning is not fully accurate. In relationships, this means you may start assigning deep significance to someone's actions, timing, or presence, even when the reality is more ordinary. The mind connects dots that may not truly belong together, turning coincidence into emotional signs. This process helps you feel emotionally safe because confusion is replaced with a narrative. However, Jung emphasized that this can also distort perception, making you believe a connection is more destined or unique than it actually is. Awareness allows you to experience emotions fully while still distinguishing between interpretation and objective reality. Self-awareness, in Jung's view, is the ability to observe your own thoughts, emotions, and reactions without immediately identifying with them. It is what allows you to notice when you are projecting, repeating emotional patterns, or reacting from unconscious wounds instead of present reality. Without this awareness, you become fully immersed in your emotional experience and assume it reflects absolute truth, especially in relationships that feel intense or meaningful. When you develop self-awareness, you begin to recognize the difference between what is happening externally and what is being activated internally. You start seeing when attraction is based on real compatibility versus when it is shaped by unmet needs, archetypes, or emotional repetition. This creates space between feeling and action, which is essential for clarity. Jung believed this process is not about suppressing emotions, but about understanding them deeply so they no longer control your perception. Over time, self-awareness reduces confusion in relationships and helps you respond consciously instead of reacting from unconscious psychological patterns. Individuation, in Carl Jung's theory, is the lifelong process of becoming a fully integrated and psychologically whole individual. It means bringing together the conscious mind and the unconscious parts of yourself so that you are no longer controlled by hidden fears, projections, or emotional patterns. Instead of living through borrowed identities, relationships, or expectations, you gradually start understanding who you are at your core. In this process, you confront aspects of yourself that were previously ignored, such as suppressed emotions, unresolved experiences, or qualities you denied. As you integrate these parts, your perception of relationships also changes. You stop seeking completion from others because you begin to feel more internally balanced. Jung believed this is the point where emotional clarity develops and connections become less about dependency and more about mutual understanding. Individuation does not remove emotions or attraction, but it changes how you relate to them. You no longer confuse inner psychological activity with destiny, allowing you to engage with life and relationships in a more conscious and grounded way. Carl Jung's ideas around relationships are often misunderstood as something mystical, but at their core, they are about awareness of the mind. He was trying to explain why human emotions in love feel so powerful, confusing, and sometimes overwhelming. When people experience strong attraction, Jung would say the unconscious mind is highly active in that moment, shaping perception more than logic or reality. That is why a person can feel perfect in the beginning, even before real understanding has developed. A key part of his work is the idea that the unconscious is not passive. It actively influences what you are drawn to, what you avoid, and what you repeat in relationships. Many emotional patterns are not chosen consciously. They come from earlier experiences, especially unresolved emotional memories, and they repeat until they are recognized. This is why some people keep encountering similar types of relationships, even when they consciously want something different. Jung also emphasized that psychological growth happens when you start observing these patterns, instead of being completely driven by them. When you slow down your reactions and question the intensity of your feelings, you begin to separate emotional experience from psychological truth. This does not mean your feelings are wrong, but that they are not always complete information. Over time, this awareness creates emotional stability. You stop confusing chemistry with compatibility and intensity with destiny. Instead of chasing the feeling of connection, you begin to look at the actual structure of the relationship. How do you feel over time, not just in the beginning? Is there consistency, respect and clarity, or only emotional highs and lows? Jung believed that real maturity in relationships comes from integrating your inner world. This means recognizing your projections, understanding your emotional triggers, and taking responsibility for your inner state. When you do this, your relationships change naturally. You become less reactive, less idealizing, and more grounded in reality. Connections become less about filling a gap and more about shared presence between two whole individuals. In the end, Carl Jung's ideas are not here to take meaning away from your feelings, but to give you clarity inside them. The emotions you experience in connection are real, but they are not always what they appear to be at first glance. What feels like destiny, deep recognition, or an unexplainable bond can often be the mind reflecting parts of your own inner world that you have not fully understood yet. When you begin to see this, you don't become colder or less emotional. You become more aware. You start to recognize where your feelings are coming from, and you stop giving every intense moment the authority of truth. Instead of being pulled unconsciously into patterns, you learn to observe them, question them, and grow beyond them. Jung's message ultimately leads you back to yourself, because the more you understand your own mind, the less confused you become about others. And in that clarity, relationships stop being a mystery you chase and start becoming a space where you meet people as they truly are, not as your mind imagined them to be. If this helped you see love and connection through a clearer lens, make sure to like and subscribe to the Jungian Path for more deep psychological insights like this. And if you've made it this far, comment the word "awaken" below, so I know you're part of this journey.